Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Osirisoid, and I'll be your host. I'm a moderator over at the MMORPG subreddit, and I'm joined by Max Hayman. He is the founder and lead developer for Return of Reckoning. For those unfamiliar with the MMO subreddit, we're a community of almost 200,000 gamers, and we're all about MMOs, whether that means discussing them, celebrating them, anticipating new releases, or being extra salty. There's something for everyone. And for those unfamiliar with Return of Reckoning, well, this AMA should tell you plenty. Before starting, though, I would just like to mention that Twitch drops are live for this AMA. So if you're thinking of playing the game, you should go make an account right now, and then you can redeem them when you try the game, because the rewards are going to be pretty good. Other than that, thank you for joining us for this AMA, Max.
Hi, yep, thank you very much for having me.
So let's get right into it. First question is, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the team behind Return of Reckoning as a project?
So I was a fan of Warhammer Online when it launched. I followed the development of it all the time. I loved they did these videos where you could watch, maybe once a month, 5-minute clip of them talking about the game. I followed those religiously and played the game, and I think it came at one point in 2013, I'd found out the game had shut down just because I'd been off the radar for a few months, and it was quite a quick time where the game was announced to be shutting down to actually shut down. And then I was trying to find something to do during my exams at one point while I was at university, and I was like, hey, I want to play some Warhammer, and I couldn't. And then I started working on what would later become Return of Reckoning. And so we're a team. There's about 20 of us, I think, from developers to game masters to artists to community team, who we all work together to try and bring back the game that we all remember and improve on it in ways Mythic either wanted to or we feel would have been good for the game. Yeah.
So you kind of answered the why you started working on it, but could you give us a timeline of when you decided, okay, I'm going to do this, to having something that was playable? What was that time frame like, and how long did it take from that point to launch? Because I know a lot of us have experienced an MMO closing down, for example, City of Heroes, and we were all devastated. So this is a significant undertaking. So yeah, the question is kind of two parts. One, how long did it take to get something running? And why do you think the game deserves to be tried in 2022 for everyone who's considering playing it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So so basically from the end of January, February of 2014 was when I started, and some other people had sort of made the game. They'd sort of cracked the encryption around the latest game client. So that's when I dug in. We could load into the world. There were no creatures or anything, and we just started getting creatures displaying, and then getting inventories working properly, and then we looked at getting quests working properly to an extent where we could have some quests working, and then we sort of thought, what do we need to have a functioning game to start with, to have something that's somewhat playable? And we thought, a bit of open RVR and maybe some scenarios that people can play in, the instant sort of battleground-like experiences. So what we did is we had Empire Tier 1, which was it's the starter zone for the Empire vs. Chaos. So we looked at having the open RVR mechanics there. We got that working. We had some, flags that you could defend and attack. We got some starter abilities working, and we got one scenario which was the Nordland Nordenwatch scenario. We got that working, so people could queue up and play that. And we released around, I think it was June or July of 2014 as Return of Reckoning. We had a website with just a few numbers of players, and within a month or something, we maybe had month or two of 50 concurrent players at once, and that's when we've grown from there. And yeah, what was the other part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so the other part of the question was, why do you think that people should try Warhammer Online in 2022 as opposed to other MMOs that are available?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Warhammer is sort of unique that it kind of follows on from what they tried to do with Dark Age of Camelot, and they did that really well, which was the open PvP essentially. So you have big battles of one team versus another battle of another team, and you're talking about hundreds of players, grouping together and fighting over objectives like castles or fortresses or just single battle objectives. And it's that you can have guilds fighting together in sort of organized way, as opposed to the more open world PvP of other games, where it's just a bit, you just throw players in a sort of area and let them fight and figure out what they want to do. This is more like there is an objective, there is something that these players can use. They can grab machinery and fight these castles, these keeps. So it's kind of unique, and I don't think anything's, you have these other games that have come out that have done this sort of big open world battle, but they've failed to sort of have hundreds of players on screen at once fighting. You see a lot of them restricted to 50 versus 50, and although that's great, it's not, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had, twice, 3 times as many, and nothing has sort of reached that, I don't think, yet. So why would you play it today? If you like the old school MMOs, you like PvP, and it's free, so there's no commitment. There's no purchasing price, there's no way to buy your way to the top. You can just jump in and play, and it's free. Give it a shot. Find some friends and have some fun.
All right, and how can your project remain in such a gray area after so much time? Because it's been several years that you guys have been operating. And why do you believe that Games Workshop hasn't reached out to you guys yet?
So, this is a bit of a tricky question. I have not spoken to anyone there directly, but I've spoken to a lot of people from Mythic, and a lot of people who are sort of around other areas of the game. So I don't know if Warhammer Online had its first in conception with another studio based in England, and we heard that Games Workshop were really keen on having a Warhammer Online game, and they really wanted it. So after a few iterations, we came to the Mythic version, and it had an amazing launch. It made loads of money and covered its costs, kept making money, and it closed down. I think it was an unfortunate time from what I've heard, and it was sort of bad timing as the license was going to be renewed, and I think if it hadn't lined up that way, it would have continued to be a game, because Dark Age of Camelot was, I think, going to be shut down, but it got taken up by a spin-off studio, and I think Warhammer would have taken that same route if the license hadn't expired before and the game shut down. So it's a bit unfortunate in that way, and I think that, who wouldn't love to see their world represented in an online game? And yeah, it's existing in a grey area, I think, because, they like having Warhammer Online as a game. I think it's a great product to still be out there, and I think it's great for the developers to be able to see their game, players play their game, and it's just, it's great to see, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it's a game that they couldn't maintain themselves for whatever reasons, still having it out there and having people play it only helps the brand at the end of the day. So next we're going to hop into questions from the users. Our first question is from dgex777, and they ask, is it possible to add new classes like night goblins or new zones like LOTD and new city sieges?
That's a good question. I think the one thing people want is more of the Warhammer world represented in this game, because we only really get to experience that slither of the old world. Really, the six races that we have, and we would love to. We really would. And if we had the tools, the time, and the effort, we'd definitely do that. But bringing a new race is crazy complicated. We need to create the models to start with, create the sort of skeletons to go with them, the rigs, and then create all the animation sets, and then create all the animation sets for all of the abilities we design. And it is a lot of work. We have created our own tools to do some of that, but finding the people who are willing to do it for free is a challenge, and it requires an amazing amount of design work. So we kind of have three main coders at the moment, and we have other developers who make other kind of tools, and it's whether we want to spend lots of time making these tools to add new stuff in, or spend that time building the gameplay mechanics and evolving them and introducing new features into the game. It's kind of like a trade-off between those. Whereas it comes to new zones, that's something we can do. We have limitations where we can't. At the moment, we don't have a great terrain editor. We can do some things. So when we introduced the new cities, we made those entirely indoor assets, really. So that's something we can do. But we are looking to take some stuff from the spin-off game Wrath of Heroes and bring it in, give it new life in Warhammer Online. So we did that with the Pyramid of Cetra. We are looking to do that with other sort of zones they created. So I mean, we have had developers work on things to make experiment with creating new classes or new mirrors of classes, but we have had issues with the presentation. Like, we can't stick these new classes in the character selection screen, and getting them in game, it's a bit funky and they don't appear quite right. But we are looking to see what we can do, and if we have enough time, we would love to do that.
That's amazing. And you touched on it briefly just now, and I heard it earlier today. You guys actually added a new zone to the game that wasn't part of the game at all. Like, you guys developed and added a new area, is that right?
Yeah, so from the conception of Warhammer Online, there was the talk of 6 capital cities, and all the pairings would lead up to attacking those cities and capturing them. But after the sort of a few years into development, they scrapped the idea of having 6 and went with 2 that were bigger. But they had started work on the dwarf and the greenskin one, and if you go back into some of the development videos, you can see these were in production, and you could see videos with them in the background and things like that. And some of these assets were left in the game, some in a broken state. So we spent a lot of time going through, seeing what we had, placing the pieces of a city together without a map. So we had to sort of see if it fits, try a different way, and then find out what the problems were, fix those. And then, because the new existing cities were much bigger than these other cities, because they wanted 6 medium-sized, ended up with 2 large, we wanted them to reflect that. So we spent a lot of time building new areas to these cities, and building on the stories. And we had someone write 600 quests or something, crazy amounts of story and things to go into it, just to make it live up to the existing cities. And it was a crazy amount of work, but we had an amazing team doing it. It was a lot of art stuff, so I'm terrible at doing art, but we had an amazing writing team, an amazing art team to work on all that, and I think we've created something that's quite beautiful, and hopefully lives up to what it would have if it hadn't been cut from the game.
That's when I heard that earlier, and you just reiterated it now, but when I heard that earlier, that absolutely blew my mind. And it was that little moment that I say little, but it's a massive amount of work. It was that made me go, okay, I'm gonna download and try this game, because I just want to see what that looks like for myself. But let's move on to the next question. So Zaravas asks, are you considering adding more classes or customizations to existing ones? For example, Empire has a Bright Wizard only, while in lore, Empire could have 9 schools of magic.
So we would need to do modify a lot of the client and the server, and how these classes and things worked, and we don't have a lot of flexibility around that. So it's a bit of a complicated one. It's kind of twofold. We don't really have the tools to make it really easy. We could spend a lot of time doing something like this. Maybe over time we'll refine the tools that we have to be able to do something as complex as that. It sounds like that could be a sort of classless type of role, which we don't really have at the moment. And it's kind of a trade-off between, do we want to work on improving city sieges, adding new city sieges to different areas, adding new dungeons, or creating the flexibility in these classes. And there are already 24 classes with 72 specializations. So there's already an amazing amount of complexity that goes into these. And we'd have to create the new gear and everything to match that, and it's an incredible amount of work. So if we had the tools and things, we would love to experiment with new classes and things like that. But right now, we're trying to focus on improving the game right now, and then looking to adding new content. So it's something that we would love to do.
Yeah, completely understandable. One question coming in from Henchicken asking, is it possible to increase client performance and move the client renderer to DX11 or some DX12 proxy?
So that's quite a good question, because the game client was originally designed for computers from 2000 and before 2008 with Windows XP, so it's very single threaded, and it's obviously using DirectX 9. When you switch over to people who are running the game in sort of Linux or Mac OS, they have these translation layers that translate the DirectX 9 to whatever OpenGL or something, whatever their operating system uses, and those technologies can be used in Windows. So one of our developers has been using a DirectX 9 to Vulkan proxy library, and they've had great success. And we are considering trying to measure the performance and see how much it improves, and if anyone has any compatibility issues, to try and enable that for people who download the game to get some bonus out of it. Without the actual game source code, there's not much we can do. But I do know that originally Mythic had developed a sort of DirectX 10 version of the game, but at the time you could only use that when you were using Windows Vista, and we know how that went down, so we saw why they didn't release it. So it's something we're looking at, and we might release something with that soon. You can do it unofficially at the moment. You can feel free to download one of these proxies and plug it into the game folder, and it should work. But we might support it, in quotes, at some point in the future.
Alright, and next question coming in from a username I can't pronounce, so I'm just going to try to anyways. CRBenTJE asks, why does the faction population swing so often, and are there ways to have it more balanced?
Yeah, good question. The swings are really pronounced in lower popular hours. So if during the middle of the night, a lot of people would team up on one side, and they were quite strong. And we have things that against all odds, which if there's a lot of players on the enemy team, you get a bonus, and they get a debuff. And you get more XP and things like that. And affects loot drops and things like that. And we can tweak those systems a lot, but if we get really balanced, we get a lot of stalemates in the game, because you get a keep that's got a great defense and a great attacking team, and it gets very sort of locked in place. So I think a little bit of unbalance, or either that's through gameplay mechanics, or the abilities that these characters have, but we are looking at tweaking those a bit more, to have different effects during different population numbers, because it's hard to have one number that works in all situations. So it's something we're looking at.
So in a sense, the imbalance is not as big an issue, because it adds a certain degree of health to the game, and the swings keep things interesting rather than, as you said, ending in a stalemate often.
Yeah, definitely. But obviously we understand balance is important, but if it was one side that was winning all the time, it'd definitely be a problem. But I think it does fluctuate, even through times of the day to times of the month, to times of the year. You get a fluctuation of which side is more stronger, and you never see one side that's completely losing everywhere. There'll be wins in some areas and losses in the other. But we are always looking at and trying to improve that.
All right. And next question is from Volta Solis, asking, any plans to fix the dies?
So, if there are any specific die problems that people have been having, feel free to open a bug tracker with them. And if you see an existing ticket, comment on it if you have any more comments to add. So, if it comes to certain bits of armor, not all the bits of armor were specifically set up to be dieable. And because we don't have the source data, the game client knowing what which ones are, which ones aren't, it gets a bit tricky. But we are adding new stuff with new dieable areas. We are looking at we have a load of new dies that hopefully we will release soon. But if you have any specific issues with specific sets of gear or specific dies, feel free to open a bug tracker issue, or if you see one existing, just pop a message on there telling us about it.
Alright, you heard him, people. You got an issue with the dies? Let him know. Next question from Ygrit Diaz, asking, what's the reason for withholding so many unique appearance items from live? Weapons, gears, glowing auras, mounts, and not implementing them into the game yet?
So, there are kind of two sides to this. We have the stuff that hasn't been released that was originally in the game, so that could be certain mounts or rewards from dungeons that we haven't got around to doing yet. So the two big ones probably are the Lost Veil and Tomb of the Vulture Lord. And when we release those contents, we want to have all the rewards that were available at the time to be available then. When it comes to things like mounts, I think the game came around at a time when mounts weren't really important in games. You had your standard mounts and a few others, but not the amount of content that some games have now. So there's a very limited set. So we reserve some for events and things, like we throw them out when we do Twitch drops, or if we have a live event, we'll throw some of this limited edition stuff out that people can get. If there's anything you think should be in the game, and it's not at the moment, feel free to bring it up on the forums, and we'll look into why it's not there. A lot of the gear that you see that we don't use, that wasn't in the game, that could be for various reasons, like it only works on certain NPCs, or some animations break when using it, and that's something we could fix. Is very time consuming, and we're not really sure exactly which ones don't work. We are kind of building a list, but if it's not in the game, a lot of the material of which quests were rewarded which items has been lost from the original game. So if you knew, or you have a source you want to post on the forums, we'll look into it, try and see if we can fix it.
Alrighty then. Next question is from a name I'm going to butcher, Gwalch Juni, asking, when is the server officially going live? Or will it always be in an alpha/beta stage?
So that's a good question, and it's kind of there's kind of two reasons for that. Technically, we haven't added everything back in the base game, so that the Lost Veil and some of the lairs and aren't feature complete, and even some of the existing public quests, although they're functionally working, they may not work exactly how they did on the live game. So the animation sequences of someone walking somewhere and blowing up, those things may not be in there, and at the time when we implemented them, we didn't have the sort of ability to do that. And another reason is because when we first launched, we didn't have the alpha tag on the logo, and we got a lot of people who would come to us to report problems and get angry and expect us to be a multi-million-pound company being able to fix these problems when we really weren't. So it was kind of setting the expectation that it's alpha, we're trying, it's not going to be the perfect experience, but we're doing everything we can to try and make it that. So we wanted to set the bar a bit low and hopefully over-deliver to the expectations. So this is kind of twofold. Hopefully when we get feature complete, we'll at least move into the beta stage, and but we'll see.
Alrighty then. Next question is from different ad 8350. He says, or they say, one huge stuff I loves back in retail was the fact that you could invade PvE dungeons, only in LOTD. Any chance you could put this function in the game?
So at the moment we don't have Tomb of the Vulture Lord in the game. It's something we will introduce at some point. We have Land of the Dead's main open RVR area working, which was redesigned from how the original game had it. The original game had it as a public quest kind of thing. It's a little bit weird, but I feel like open RVR was what the community really wanted, and we've seen a lot of positive feedback about that. Regarding the PvE invading dungeons thing, I get a lot of mixed sort of feelings about that from people who talk about it. Some people who want to go in and do a dungeon do get annoyed that someone just comes in the entrance, kills them, and takes over. And it's something we haven't implemented any mechanics for yet. So it's something, if people really want to see this back in the game, we could do it. And if you have an opinion, feel free to open up a forum post, tell us about it, and hopefully someone will come and speak the other way, and you can debate it out, and we can see the pros and cons. But it's definitely not decided yet, so yeah, it's up for discussion.
Okay. Next question is from Fragrant Policy 2491. Will we be able to get the Griffin or Manticore unique mounts in an accessible way, even if it was grindy or costly?
Good question. So currently these mounts are gained by telling us game-breaking bugs. So whether that's if something pops up like an exploit where you can duplicate your items as the extreme, or stack abilities a lot to be unkillable. We don't give them out as much anymore as we used to, because just those bugs don't come up as much, which is great. And for the reason the community likes to refer to them as snitch mounts, because if you snitch, you get the mounts, which is quite funny. But we do want to keep them that way, just because the exclusivity of people who have told us this, and we really appreciate that. But we can do things now that like reskinning them, so we can take the textures and do different colors or completely change how they look, and maybe we could release something like that. We are looking at taking mounts, reskinning them into, think of a unicorn, and you can make a dark unicorn or something like that as an extreme, and claimable in that way. But at the moment we want to keep them as what they are, just out of sort of thanks to the people that helped us along the way.
Alright, well, sign me up for a dark unicorn. That sounds awesome. And following that, the next question is from Lito Vito, asking, will the elf capital city be developed and released by Return of Reckoning?
I really would love to. I really would love to see the elf cities in the game. When we did the dwarf and greenskin cities, they were sort of half-built. Mythic had put a lot of work into the dwarf and greenskin cities and all their areas, because they were the first they developed. So they had a lot of time, a lot of detail went into them, a lot of building interiors, a lot of props and things like that. And then they did the Empire and Chaos things, and then they moved on to the elf things. And they must have rushed it, because there's a lot less assets to work with when it comes to the high elves and the dark elves. So we don't have a lot to work with, and we'd have to do a lot from scratch. We don't really have much in terms of the design that they had in mind for them, except for like a very vague map layout. So if someone came along with us with the tools and everything we would need, we would definitely put that on the agenda. But right now, it's not on the immediate agenda. I know people on the team want to do it, and I think some artists are already thinking up ideas about it, but it's not in production. But we would love to. We would absolutely love to.
Alright, and the next question is from Sign1ALH. Was there really an utter necessity of changing the way City Siege is triggered from player-driven to scheduled? And are there any plans to revert the system?
So, the completely campaign-triggered cities, which when a group of players attacked keeps and then moved up to the fortresses, and then if you got 2 fortresses, you would then trigger a city siege. That kind of feeds back into one of the previous questions, where when the population was lower, you'd get these stronger sides. So a lot of the city sieges would happen in the middle of the night, when a small amount of the player base was online, and it wouldn't happen as frequently on peak times, when everyone's logging in. So you'd get players who have to wake up in the middle of the night, and it was at the beginning it was okay, sort of okay, because it was new content, exciting. But when it's been a few years now, and people got tired of waking up at 2 a.m. to do a city siege. So with the scheduled cities, it kind of aims to make sure they happen in popular times and sort of on a schedule that kind of tries to accommodate all the time zones. So it gives people time to better organize. It's going to happen Tuesday at 8 p.m. or something, and it allows you to plan around that as people who have other things to do in their lives. As much as we all want to play video games all the time, it's not something we can always do. We might change it to some sort of combined approach where we take a certain amount of zones and fortresses captured triggers the city sieges a day later or something like that, but we're looking into it, and it's something we're keeping our finger on.
Alright, next question is from Throwaway. They ask, do you have any plans on implementing the open RVR rule set from Live, which was the true open world PvP rule set where everyone was flagged for PvP at all times?
Yeah. From when the game had loads of servers, there were loads of open RVR servers and roleplay servers, and then as time went down, they kind of left with the core servers. The core servers there are big maps, there are PvE areas, there are PvP areas, or RVR areas, and you could only RVR in the RVR areas unless you've flagged yourself and an enemy flagged yourself. Whereas Open RVR rule set is always hostile at all times. And from what other people have said is, when you're trying to level in PvE and someone comes along and just stabs you, it gets frustrating. And that's kind of the reason why we kept with the core, just because that's what everyone played at the end, especially. And we would like to experiment with can we use more of the map to do actual organized RVR, whether it's more objectives or something like that. So it's something we're considering in a way, not in the traditional sense that Mythic had it, but in a different way, which kind of adds more flavor to the open RVR experience. So.
Forever Stallone KP asks, any plans in the future to buff Rune Priest's DPS tree?
We always love the balance questions. So some kinds of revamp of DPS specs of Rune Priest Zealot is something some people on the team would like to do in the future. We don't have any concrete plans, but it'd be something we're looking at is more AoE and Warband focused than the DPS specs for Archmage and Shamans. So we'll see. It's something that's in a discussion. It's always a hot topic, but we need to get the details down before we can really say yes or no.
Alright, and just to clarify, you guys basically have the ability to tweak the numbers at will for, cooldowns and damage and all of the different effects that abilities have. So it's more a matter of figuring out the right balance for the objective, correct?
Yes, we have the ability to add new abilities, change them, change the effects, change the timings, everything like that. We can do that.
Alright, cool. Next question is from Crew Cop. Will the new cities see any more development? What's there now? Wait, how did this person write this? Basically, they're asking, are the new cities going to see any more development beyond what there is now?
So, yes. So, when we released them, we pushed really hard to get them out at a set date. We could have spent years working on the dungeons, the public quests, the city siege versions, and then release it all at once. And that would have been, an amazing sort of thing. But we wanted people to see them, that, you've already been waiting 12 years to see these cities. We wanted people to see them as soon as possible. So we spent a lot of time getting them into the shape that's sort of the minimum viable. This is what the city is. You can go in it. It's just like the other cities, but the dungeons aren't there yet. The public quests aren't there yet. The city sieges aren't there yet. So we spent a lot of time crunching to meet that release date, which was Warhammer's birthday. a lot of time, not much sleep. 600 quests, making sure they all work, testing them. Every goblin, every dwarf was dressed, named, spawned in its position, posed with its animation sets. And the stories to fill in the gaps and the depth that we would have expected if Mythic had finished them. We got a bit burned out on the cities, to be honest, but we are looking at other content to do with the cities, definitely.
Awesome, looking forward to it. The next question is from General Boat 2531. They ask, can you add a mercenary type system to RVR? When one faction has a large population advantage, you can have the option to play for the enemy realm for a certain period of time or until balance is reached naturally.
So, because we already allow for players to play both realms on the same account, so they can play the Order of Destruction on the same account, it kind of, I feel like, doesn't make this needed, because it requires an incredible amount of work to get this working. And also because we don't have the same classes on both sides, a lot of the abilities weren't really designed to be played with both people on the same team. So it's not something we're likely to add at the moment. No.
Alright, another balancing question from the Palm Pyro God. When will Shamans be buffed, or at least its class mechanic reworked?
So we don't have a timeline for this. But the Shamans have received some smaller tweaks, like the heal over time ability affecting up to 3 targets. But it's not something we have immediately on our timeline. No, not at the moment.
Alright, next question is not balance related. From Fury A9X, or Furion 9X, with enough funding, would rebuilding the game in a modern game engine be considered, or even possible?
So that's a very good question. So first of all, there's the legal side of the question, which I'll push to the side for now. So, as I said before, Mythic had the DirectX 10 version of the game working. And we know the core components that the game used, sort of libraries, the Gamebryo engine. So the Gamebryo engine is basically just the graphics engine. That had been updated since 2008, so they're up to about 2014, and I think they're still operating in some way today. I'm not too sure. So we could, move the game along to the latest version of that and then work from there. And without the actual code, there's not a lot we can do at the moment. I imagine it could have gone something like World of Warcraft has done, where it's still the same core game, but they've done a lot of incremental updates over the years. Supporting more platforms, making the game work more smoothly on newer computers. And you could rebuild the game on a new engine. A lot of the third-party tech would need to be updated. And if we had the code, this is something we would love to sort of pursue in some way or shape or form. But at the moment, it's a lot of reverse engineering work to do something like this. So the closest we'll get at the moment will probably be the sort of the graphics library proxy things. So.
All right. Next question from Tibdum Butmer. Will it be possible to present us a roadmap about what you plan to implement in the near to far future of the game?
So this is a bit of a tricky question, and it comes up quite a lot, and we are very volunteer driven, so we have a lot of things that are in the early incubation kind of stage. For example, the Dwarf and Greenskin cities were being developed mainly by one person for 2 or 3 years before we poured a lot of effort in to sort of meet a deadline. It was something everyone wanted to commit to. So, we could have mentioned we were working on that, and people wouldn't have seen it for a few years. And we experiment with a lot of things that don't see the light of day, or we couldn't really get working properly because of the limitations that we have. So, the remaining dungeons is something we want to work on, and we are looking to bring some Wrath of Heroes content back into the game. And we're looking at filling up the live event calendar, which are sort of yearly events that happen. So, we have a Christmas-themed one and things like that. We are looking to expand that to have more content going out throughout the year. And we are looking at new scenarios and new city sieges for the new cities. So those are kind of things we're sort of poking our fingers into the moment, along with all the other content we're working on in terms of keeping RVR up to date and things like that. So that's all I can really say at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that sounds in line of the with the mantra that you kind of echoed earlier, which is um, under promise and over deliver. People can't be upset about something not being released if you haven't announced it and then you just drop it all of a sudden.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and it's something that puts a lot of pressure on. If we say we're going to release this in a few months, and a developer has a lot of real life stuff going on, we've seen it. It puts a lot of pressure on this person who's we don't pay them or anything like that. So it's really hard to pressure someone to working on something like this, and it's not something I like to do. It's not something I like having done to me. So we try and if someone's working on something, I always try and say, when do you think you'll have this done minimum and sort of maximum time? To try and get an idea, and we don't announce anything of that. It's just to keep a kind of idea if we need to get someone to help them and things like that. So it's something we try and do for the mental health of everyone on the team.
if only all managers had that approach, life would be much easier. Next question from Learned Owl Bear. How is Land of the Dead different in an ROR versus War?
So far we've only released the Land of the Dead part of the Necropolis of Xandri part, which of Land of the Dead, which is the open world zone, which originally had public quests, a world boss, and then the Tomb of the Vulture Lord dungeon at the end. So we've only got the Necropolis of Xandri, the open world part at the moment. We've revamped it to be very PvP RVR focused. Big warbands, big battle objectives. We have some PvE stuff. It's kind of almost third faction-y PvE stuff as opposed to traditional PvE. So they're kind of acting as like a third round, these Tomb Kings. And we are looking at adding new stuff to this. And it's definitely a phase one of a few phases of the Land of the Dead. So keep tuned in, and we'll see.
Alright, next question from Painted Black 12. Are there any plans to make the new currency's account shareable across characters, at least within the same realm?
So it's not something we're planning on doing at the moment, because we want to keep true to the nature of how the original game worked. We are a free game. There's no money to sink into it, so you put as much as you get out of it, if that kind of makes sense. So if you want to play your character, you play it, and that's your character. You level them up. No one can pay to be above you. So if someone's got a really good character and loads of tokens, and they can just send them to their alts and level them up really fast, it's kind of unfair for newer players who can't level up that quick. So we try and make it, everyone who's got the top level character kind of leveled up that the hard work they put in to get to that level. And I think that's important, especially in sort of traditional MMOs. So it's not something we're looking into at the moment. Feel free to give us feedback on the forums if you feel otherwise. But yeah.
Alright, next question from DM Malice. Will we see any Land of the Dead themed scenarios?
So we released the Pyramid of Cetra when we released the Land of the Dead. And the sort of idea behind this was Cetra is pyramid is in a different area of Land of the Dead. And so when you're traveling in the Zeppelin to get there, you crash land into this other area. And so it's a map that was taken from the Wrath of Heroes, which was the spin-off MOBA type game, 6v6v6 tri-realm MOBA style MMO combat thing that Mythic did for a year or something before they closed down. So we've taken that and lifted it into Warhammer Online, and that's the first of Land of the Dead we're looking at, scenarios, battlegrounds, but we are looking to other undead scenarios, and I'll leave it at that.
Alright then, we'll be in anticipation till then. The next question is by Merther Oatstone 12. Will Kara Zakarik and Karak 8 Peaks get proper lighting effects for its light sources? Currently, it's very basic when compared to other settlements.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the lighting in the game is baked in. So that means it went through a process when Mythic designed it. They placed everything everywhere, set up the lights, and then ran it through a process which I've heard took around 18 hours, and it would crash often, so they had to move the mouse on the computer that did it, which did all the rendering for the lighting. And we don't have that working yet to be able to do that, but it's something that once we get working, we can plug in our existing data that we've made, run it through the process, and we should have the lighting. So it's not something that we're held back or have to go back and do much work again to get working. And it's just a limitation that we have at the moment. If we had sort of the original tools Mythic had, that's something would have been standard. So unfortunately not at the moment, but it's something we hopefully can have at some point in the future.
Alright, the next question is by Yigrit Diaz once more. They ask, in the last Q&A you mentioned that you've been working on a new weapon set that was meant to be obtainable through SC. How are they coming along? And are the unique appearances made by yourselves?
So we have a couple of unused weapon models for scenario weapons in the game, and it's something we'll likely add, although not necessarily scenario specific now that we have a unified currency for PvP. And we have modelers that are creating weapons and going into a sort of library of weapons that we can use for future content. Our pipeline for creating weapon models has been a lot more streamlined, so we can easily get weapons into the game as opposed to other sets of armor. And we are creating unique models made by ourselves. We are also looking at sort of reskinning. We can do a lot, and we've seen some great examples of creating almost completely different pieces of weapon armor just from changing the textures. So that's something that it looks really good. I had my doubts at first, thinking, oh, it's just a blue version of that, but the artists have done some amazing things with just changing textures, and it saves a lot of time. So that's something we're looking at.
That's amazing. I'd love to see them. But let's move on to the next question from Jansu0130. Is it possible the AAO, Renown Experience buff for the faction which is in less players, apply to currency Warcrest earnings as well?
So yeah, this is something we've thought about doing, and might add in the near future. We just done our relaunch of our new unified RVR currency. So we're still in the sort of phases of seeing what we can do with that and what avenues we can explore. So the bonus was implemented in the Land of the Dead Necropolis of Xandri release, where you get a bonus loot drop in the zone if your guild is holding an objective, and that's something we like to explore, where you can get bonuses for working with your guild and things like that. So it's something we're looking, and we're going to be looking at in the future. Yeah, definitely.
Next question from DifferentAd8350. Did you plan to release some PvE focused content in the near future? I'm really thinking about Lost Valley.
So Lost Vale is that dungeon I think they're referring to. A lot of people call it Lost Valley, but it is what it is. If players who played the game noticed there was a big gap between when we released the sort of city dungeons and the sort of Bastion Stair and Hunter's Vale, and that was because we were working on the Lost Vale. We kind of stopped and went back and wanted to work on Hunter's Vale, and we had to do a lot of work to getting. It was one of those dungeons where Mythic had time to sort of learn all the tools, and they did some really cool things with the tree falling down after you kill a boss, and the interactable NPCs that appear. And so we put a lot of work into getting those, fine-tuning. We rewrote our dungeon system. So we're going to be resuming work on Lost Vale, and hopefully get that done before moving on to Tomb of the Vulture Lord.
Alright, next question is from Werewolf Muted 803. They ask, are there plans for flying mounts, and if so, how will one get them?
So flying mounts. So there's a reason that we don't have flying mounts in the game. As you might see game masters or something flying around in the game, but what we don't realize is what they see. So if you remember, I don't know if anyone here played World of Warcraft, but I think when Burning Crusade was announced, one of the key points was flying mounts everywhere. And the reason why they didn't do that is if you look above, if you fly above, I'll show you guys right now if you can see in game. If you fly above this beautiful town, you'll realize that the insides of these buildings don't have any roofs. So everything's sort of designed to be seen from the ground, and if you fly above, you see missing bits. So if you had flying mounts, it would be very buggy and not a great experience. So you have to go back and sort of rebuild these areas to have roofs and things like that. A lot of these roofs won't even have collision boxes on, so you'll fall right through them. So it would require an incredible amount of work, going through all the zones, all the cities, and revamping them. And it's not something that we have the time or the manpower to do at the moment. And it brings into us another discussion about how does that work with RVR. If your enemies can just fly over the gates and things like that, it changes the dynamic a lot. So it's not something we're looking at doing at the moment. And yeah.
All right. The next question is from Racy Star. What are your thoughts on current class balance? Is there any overperforming classes that need to be brought down? Weaker classes that you plan on bringing up, or do you feel like everything is in a good spot?
So I think we're in a good position, a position that we've been in better than a long while. I think we had a lot of problems where we would do a lot of balance changes, and people love, these balance changes are always, people either love them or hate them, and we did a lot of them. I think we did some even weekly, and I think we were upsetting a lot of people where, the sort of casual players who, couldn't spend all day playing, maybe played, once a week or something, and they'd log in that week and their character would, they've changed the way you've got to play, and we kind of moved to a more long-term balance changes. So yeah, it's a hard one because we changing the way the abilities work has been a bit complicated. We are working on new tooling, which makes it a lot easier for us to understand, and we would have to make changes on the server and the client to make things work properly. And we're working on sort of unifying that to make it work more smoothly. Get some people, new people on the team who are trained up to work on these ability things, so we can do more big things. We're trying to make a pass on anything that's bugged abilities, tactics, and things that have been reported on the bug tracker, because when we do these massive ability changes all the time, we lose track of what's kind of still broken and what's been fixed. So we're trying to work on the quality of life and bug fixing existing content and seeing how that affects balance. And we would be doing balance changes in the future. So yeah, it's something we're looking at. Yeah, we do balance changes.
Clearly, it's something that you've given a lot of thought to, as it is core to the game, so that makes complete sense. But I think that taking a steadier approach and not doing it as frequently allows things to settle a bit more, because a change can seem really significant at first, but be completely insignificant within a week or two. Or contrarily, it can be something that seems completely minor and breaks a class. So yeah. Next question is from Throwaway. They ask, are there any active plans for another round of community-made weapon models like we had with the Fortress weapons?
So yeah, the community members who contributed to the modeling of weapons, we keep in contact with them, and if we have ideas of weapons, we have people who are good at concept art who can draw these amazing, beautiful looking weapons, and then we'll see if any one of the artists want to try modeling them and then skinning them. And we also have these artists who are good at drawing and things to do reskinning of the weapons, and they look amazing. And it's something, if anyone is, from the community, is great at modeling or artwork or anything like that, get in contact with us. We have a section in the forum that you can sort of apply. It's informal, just, say what you're interested in doing. If you have any experience, we'll be in contact. And yeah, we're definitely interested in adding more weapons and things into the game.
All right. Next question is from Richu777. Would you consider enabling long-term Twitch drops, even with low rewards, to make the game more popular?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know how familiar you are with Twitch drops, but there was a version 1 of the system, and we implemented that. It was a lot of work, and then we found out a month later that they were releasing version 2, and your existing version would stop working in a few months, which was quite frustrating. So we kind of used as many drop systems as we could. It was quite a clunky way to do it, and it required a bit of development time to get them set up every time. And we have implemented the new version now, and it allows our community team to be able to organize the drops a lot without any other development interaction, which is fantastic. So we are looking at doing more drops and long-term drops. We're trying to explore a range of options there, so it's definitely something we're looking at.
Alright, and to remind everyone watching, especially those who have yet to play the game at all, this stream does have Twitch drops, so make an account on Return of Reckoning, and then you can get these drops for your brand new account, which, from my understand, are geared towards new players, and they'll really help with your new character. That said, the next question is from Some Extent 1786. Are there some layers not yet implemented in the game? Are they on the radar, or is there no ETA?
So we have a number of layers in the game, and layers are like mini dungeon kind of things, open world bosses that you can go and fight. And originally in the game there would be some sort of puzzle you have to solve to open the door. For example, I think the most basic one is you had to get one of each career archetype to stand on a sort of block, and then the gate would open. And there are some that are really complicated and some that are quite simple, and I think when we first went through implementing these, we just had the door openable by clicking on it or something like that. So not all of them were done. We are looking at going back and getting these just as they were on Mythic, because they're a bit pointless, but they're also a bit fun. You've got to find out how the door opens, and you've got to do the prerequisites. There's a little bit of a puzzle to it, and the puzzle in the Lost Vale, where you have to, there's like these stones, and you have to work out the combination to be able to do it. And when you do it, these birds appear, and it's quite magical. That it took a bit of work to get working, but I think it really paid off. It's really nice. And we are looking at putting those puzzles in. We are looking at going back, finding ones that aren't working, maybe tying it into a sort of live event, so we have a bit of content to go with a bit of an event. We have one in mind that's coming hopefully soon, and I think it will be quite fun. So it's definitely in the works.
Alright, and the last question is from Mysterious Month 869, and they ask, do you plan to release new sets with new skins for all classes in the near future?
So this is a bit of a tricky one, and so new sets are harder because the asset pipeline we need to so the way we get them from the modeling program into the game is very different from weapons or shields, for example. So we have managed to work these out and build tools that means we can load in these things into the game and put them back in from the modeling software and things like that. But it's a lot of work when it comes to, you got to think about, we have to make 24 new sets of gear for for characters. We have experimented with making new boots and things, and it was a bit tricky until we had other bits of the art pipeline going, and we're getting there. And then we can sort of let people our art team download these and start making new boots and things and new shoulder pads that we've got working for some careers. It's something we're looking at, but it's an incredible amount of work, and we can see why Mythic didn't do it a lot of the time.
Alright, and that concludes all the questions that we had selected from the AMA thread. Before I wrap this up, is there anything you'd like to say, both to your community, but also to the MMO subreddit and anyone else that's tuned in?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone for tuning in and thank you for everyone for supporting us. Sorry, my cat's just run into the screen. We are a small team, and it's incredible to have the amount of support that we have. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. And thank you for everyone who's part of the team.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. These kind of AMAs are essential to the MMO community, to gaming communities. I think you guys are extremely transparent, and you've done amazing work as a group of essentially volunteers. So thank you for this AMA, and yeah, good night, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world.
Yep, thank you.